Well, as the Fed prints more money, the value of the dollar is expected to keep falling. That will make, or should make, American goods less expensive overseas. But so far, it really hasn't been enough for the U.S. when it comes to improving the trade deficit with China. Government and businesses have blamed China and its currency, which they say is undervalued and needs to move higher. But a stronger yuan may not be exactly what the West needs. That's the argument from economist Yukon Huang in a Bloomberg opinion piece out today. Huang is a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment and a former country director for the World Bank in China. He joins us now from Washington. Yukon, great to have you here with Matt and myself. You say when we focus on the exchange rate policy in China, we focus on the wrong thing. We focus on the total trade figures. That's not right. You say we need to focus on the regional supply chain and specifically the processing trade. This sounds a little bit like an economics class, but explain it because it's an important point.
Well, if you look at the trade and production pattern coming from East Asia 20 years ago, it's completely different than the pattern today. 20 years ago, China and all the East Asian countries were producing more or less individually an intact product and exporting it directly to the U.S. and the West. Today, they're producing parts and components, and then they're taking these parts and components, shipping it to China. China's assembling these parts and components and then exporting it to the West. And parts and components now account for maybe 55% of the trade, exports of trade from China. Take a $150 iPod, which China exports to the U.S. Only $5 of that $150 is actually produced in China. The rest is coming from elsewhere. In sum, the U.S.-China trade imbalance is really a U.S. deficit with all of East Asia and not just China.
And correct me if I'm wrong here. I want to point out, by the way, you wrote an article for us today. It's available on the website at Bloomberg.com. These are not the kind of jobs that Americans want or would take if we had them, right? These sort of piecing together before export jobs.
Well, China produces a range of commodities from what I would call low-tech to high-tech. But if you take these high-tech processing products, 80 or 90% of them are actually produced in other countries with higher technologies. Only 10 or 20% is produced in China. But of these low-tech, low labor-intensive product lines, these are not the kinds of jobs or products that the United States is competitive with. So if the renminbi is actually going to increase in value, these industries will actually move to places like South Asia or to Latin America. They certainly won't come to the United States.
So what are the implications then potentially if, Yukon, that the U.S. officials continue to pressure China when it comes to their currency? What are potentially the implications that you could see for the United States and other developed economies, such as the rest of Europe?
The first thing I'd like to point out is, it's not a U.S.-China exchange rate issue. It's a U.S.-East Asia exchange rate issue. And let's assume that the solution requires a multilateral solution such that all the East Asian currencies are adjusted in some kind of coordinated way. And this is no trivial matter. It not only involves a country like China, which is doing well, but it involves Japan, for example, which has other problems. So it's not going to be an easy fix. But suppose that the renminbi was revalued upward by about 20–25%. The two major things that occur is at the low end, China will actually try to produce more of these low-end products internally in the interior provinces. And they can do this now better than they could do this, let's say, 10 years ago. And the reason is they've improved their internal transport links. But the high end, which is of interest to the United States and to the Western world, China is going to be much more aggressive at the high end. And it's going to try to leapfrog in terms of technological basis of its products to much more higher valued, innovative products. And you already see this.
Right. And that's where you're saying that the U.S. and Europe could start to be worried. We're going to have to leave it there. It's an interesting story, and as Matt mentioned, it is on the Bloomberg terminal. Yukon Huang, thank you so much for breaking it down for us. We appreciate it.